Meeting of the Senate Judiciary Committee will come to order. I want to welcome my colleagues to our first executive meeting of the new 118th Congress. Especially I'd like to thank my friend Senator Graham, the incoming ranking member. We've worked on a lot of things together in the past and look forward to doing the same in the future. Today's agenda includes 25 judicial nominees, 2 nominees to the Department of Justice. All received hearings during the last Congress and all received committee votes as well. Standard practice, these nominees were returned to the President at the end of the last Congress. They've been renominated or listed on today's agenda. They will all be held over at the request of the minority. If you'll bear with me, I'll read their names into the record. Nancy Abudu, 11th Circuit, DeAndre Benjamin for the 4th Circuit, Rachel Blumkatz for the 6th Circuit, Cindy Chung, 3rd Circuit, Bradley Garcia, DC Circuit, Anthony Johnstone, 9th Circuit, Maria Khan, 2nd Circuit, Julie Reichelman, 1st Circuit, Daniel Calabretta, Eastern District of California, Tiffany Cartwright, Western District of Washington, Nusrat Chaudhry for the Eastern District of New York, Jessica Clark for the Southern District of New York, Matthew Garcia for the District of New Mexico, Margaret Guzman for the District of Massachusetts, Dale Ho for the Southern District of New York, Lindsey Jenkins for the Northern District of Illinois, Kenley Cotto for the Central District of California, Araceli Martinez Olguin for the Northern District of California, Gina Menendez Miro for the District of Puerto Rico, Natasha Murrow for the Eastern District of New York, Adrian Nelson for the District of Oregon, Anna Reyes for the District of Columbia, Hernan Vera for the Central District of California, Jamar Walker for the Eastern District of Virginia, Jamal Whitehead for the Western District of Washington, Rosemary Hidalgo to be Director of Violence Against Women Office, Amy Solomon, Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Justice Programs. The nominees will all be held over. I look forward to voting on them at our next committee meeting. Before turning to Ranking Member Graham, I have 2 points of personal privilege. I want to acknowledge 2 senior members of my staff who are departing the committee. First, I want to recognize Phil Brest, who served the committee for over 6 years. He began as nominations counsel, served as staff director under Ranking Member Feinstein, and recently was my chief counsel for nominations. During his time with the committee, Phil worked on or oversaw 4 Supreme Court nominations and literally hundreds of other judicial and executive branch nominations. He became a well-known presence around the Senate and worked tirelessly, days, nights, and weekends to help steer the nominations process. His advice and wisdom were invaluable, and other members of this committee relied on him as well. Phil has an institutional memory which is invaluable on the subject of committee precedent. He's gone to work as special assistant to President Biden and associate counsel in the White House counsel's office, where he'll continue to work on judicial nominations. I expect the White House will benefit from his diligence and thoughtfulness as we did. He's here today because he was nervous that we wouldn't make a quorum. So please join me in thanking Phil for his service to the committee. Phil, for over 4 years, Sarah Zadeb served this committee as an oversight counsel, including the past 2 years as my chief oversight counsel, outstanding and diligent. Her tenure has clearly demonstrated the vital role of appropriate congressional oversight, from leading the committee's historic Subverting Justice investigation to her work holding the FBI to account for its egregious handling of the Larry Nassar investigation. Sarah has continuously helped ensure that fraud, waste, abuse are brought to light. She's now joining the Department of Justice as Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Office of Legislative Affairs, where she'll make sure that the Department of Justice answers our mail. Unfortunately, Sarah was unable to be here in person today. She's probably answering some of our letters right this moment, but I'm thankful for the work that she's given and the wisdom that she's shown in her service to the committee. I now turn to Ranking Member Graham for any remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, we're off to the races in the committee. Congratulations to both of the staff members for your hard work. The blue slip, the last thing pretty much left that makes senators very relevant in the judge process, nominating process, is blue slips regarding district judges. When I was chairman a couple of years ago, you will feel it too, there was pressure to change the blue slip process so we could fill any vacancy we liked, regardless of what the senator in that state said. 2 senators, I think it's important we keep it. Now we find ourselves where you have a Democratic president, a small Democratic majority, and openings in red states. When the situation was similar, we had 3 states, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, where there were vacancies for the entire presidency of Donald Trump, and none of them were filled. We had 60 vacancies in California, and during the presidency, there were only 5 filled. But you did work with us, and I want to urge my colleagues who represent red states, where you have 2 Republican senators for their vacancies, to try your best to find a way to create a process that will allow nominations to go forward in a reasonable fashion. I'm not asking anybody to capitulate. I am asking people to cooperate. And I'm hoping we can find some system that works. And I will constantly remind you what you did to us and we did to you. And the hope is that we can get this Congress off to a decent start. As to Senator Cotton, I read some concerns he had about information being withheld regarding classified documents. I think many of us share that concern, and I'm hoping people can work with Senator Cotton and others to really find out what happened with Pence, Biden, and Trump, and what kind of documents they have. We're not going to try to interfere with a criminal investigation, but I think most of us like to know what are we talking about in some classified settings. So I hope that can be resolved. You got vacancies in Florida, you got vacancies in Louisiana, you got vacancies in Texas. I'll urge my colleagues to sit down with the White House and see if we can get a process moving. And all these are great senators, and look forward to working with you where we can.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cornyn, let me say one word and then I'll recognize you.
Mr. Chair.
Just to put numbers behind these statements, we sent 130 blue slips, signed them during the Trump administration, 130. And it resulted in 84 district court judges nominees moving forward. In my state of Illinois, we filled every vacancy, and I worked with the Trump White House to do it. And if there's ever an odd couple in politics, that was one of them. But we did it, and I had to give on some, they gave on others, and we ultimately filled these vacancies. So far, we've seen interesting cooperation in the committee in the first 2 years. States of Ohio and Pennsylvania come to mind immediately, where there was a decision by the Republican senators to join in the effort. Indiana was one of the most recent ones, and we saw evidence of that with Senator Young's presence yesterday. It can be done if you're willing to sit down and be reasonable on both sides of the table. That can happen. So those 130 blue slips resulted in filling those vacancies. So far, we've only received 12 blue slips in the first 2 years from the Republican side. I also found something interesting that I want to comment on. In several instances, in both cases, I don't see Senator Booker, but involved the House Black Caucus, they came to me, individual Democratic members from states, and said, we don't think we have any chance of getting cooperation with the Republican senators and filling the vacancies in our state. And I said, let's try. And we did. We ended up in 2 different instances, and I won't name the states at this moment, opening up a conversation between the senators and a Democratic congressman, which led to the filling of a vacancy. It can be done, and before I recognize Senator Cornyn, I think your state has quite a few vacancies at this moment, but I'm not going to pick on Texas. The same is true for a lot of states, and I hope that everybody will take a positive view toward approaching this. Senator Cornyn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to just speak briefly to both the points that you and that Senator Graham raised. My experience has been when there's been a president from the Democratic Party is that the White House counsel reaches out to members of the Judiciary Committee and establishes some communication and rapport. That has not happened in the Biden administration. I know there's been some turnover, but I couldn't give you the name of the White House counsel. I couldn't pick them out of a lineup. And that's unique in my experience. So maybe that's something we can do to establish a little more communication and rapport. But a few little data points. For example, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which includes Texas, in February of 2022, the White House gave Senator Cruz and I 3 weeks to come up with some names. We told them we'd like to run the potential candidates through our Federal Judicial Evaluation Committee, a bipartisan committee, which I think has a great record of success, recommending strong candidates from a bipartisan membership. That was February 22. We gave the White House 10 names on 6 days later, not 3 weeks later, but 6 days later. On August the 19th, 6 months later, the White House finally reached out to us to say that they were ready to move forward. But I want to point out that it wasn't because of our delay. It was because of whatever the reasons the White House is delayed. In 2 district court vacancies, Laredo and Del Rio, the White House didn't raise these vacancies with Senator Cruz and I at all before we posted for the vacancy on March the 11th. In November, that was March, it was posted. In November, we brought up the vacancies with the White House ourselves. And they hadn't mentioned it or pushed for any nominations for these vacancies. Then, about a week later, November 16th, we sent the White House a press release for the 2 vacancies where Senator Cruz and I posted it, solicited applicants so they could go through our bipartisan Federal Judicial Evaluation Committee. And it wasn't until last week that the White House expressed an interest in looking at these vacancies. So as you can see, it's been not quite a year, maybe 10 months since we brought it up, not them. And then on U.S. attorneys, on June the 30th, 2022, we recommended 4 nominees to fill 4 positions for U.S. attorneys, and 3 out of those 4 were confirmed last Congress. But there still hasn't been a nomination for the Eastern District of Texas, and the White House has had Damian Diggs's name, which was the nominee that we recommended for that vacancy. They've had that name since June the 30th, 2022. So we would like to maintain some cooperation and communication with the White House, and certainly we're not doing anything to slow this down. I do think it's important, and I know virtually every member of the committee has some sort of committee from the bar to sort of evaluate some of these nominees, and even in the case of circuit court nominees where the blue slip ordinarily doesn't apply, there's been a tradition of consultation, and I think we've all benefited, and the bench has benefited from that kind of consultation. So I just want to mention that information because I think it's important to the topic that you raised.
Thanks, Senator Cornyn, and it is definitely a two-way street. We're asking members to try to cooperate, but certainly the White House has to do the same.
Mr. Chairman.
And may I mention something on the other thing that Senator Graham raised, please? I'll be quick. I'm a member of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, which, as you know, is the least partisan committee in the Congress. Senator Warner, Senator Rubio operate arm in arm as a bipartisan team to perform the kind of oversight that I think helps instill public confidence in what the intelligence community is doing. Yesterday, we were informed that the Director of National Intelligence has no information about the classified information that was found at Mar-a-Lago, that was found in President Biden's garage and in his office, and then was found in Vice President Pence's office. Now, ordinarily, I think we're all familiar with the fact that when there's an investigation, and of course there's been special counsel appointed in 2 of those cases, ordinarily you would say, well, we don't want to disturb the integrity of the investigation, in fairness primarily to the person being investigated. But I would suggest that this is different. Congress has a constitutional responsibility to provide oversight into the intelligence gathering by the intelligence community, all 17 agencies that fit under that umbrella. This is something we cannot do if the Biden Justice Department says they're not going to share with us what intelligence products President Biden stored in his garage or stored at his think tank in Philadelphia. This is not designed to prejudice President Biden or President Trump or Vice President Pence. We need to know what our adversaries know. And the reason why taking classified information outside of a secure facility is so egregious is because it does make available to our adversaries potentially information that we'd prefer to keep secret in the national security interest. And so, to me, this looms much larger than an ordinary investigation by a U.S. attorney or by the Department of Justice. And I think what you saw, and that Senator Graham alluded to, is bipartisan outrage at the fact that the Director of National Intelligence, who's responsible for essentially all 17 branches of the intelligence community, said, you know, the Department of Justice tells us to stand down, we stand down. We don't know what they have. Now, I'm going to be careful here and not talk about what was said in confidence, but even if this information was somehow shared with the agency or of the federal government that produced the intelligence product to evaluate it, they're not policymakers. I mean, by design, they're not policymakers. They're supposed to tell us the good, bad, and the ugly without regard to any sort of policy or political affiliation. We are the policymakers. And it's not hard to imagine some scenario in which classified information is taken out of a secure facility, is made available to our adversaries, that it would threaten the national security of the United States in ways that we would need to respond to as policymakers. So I think that explains why you saw Chairman Warner, Vice Chairman Rubio, and a bipartisan group of senators on the intelligence community express outrage at this unwillingness of the Biden administration. And the Department of Justice is an arm of the Biden administration. The Biden administration blocking congressional oversight and knowledge of these classified materials by Congress, which has a constitutional responsibility to perform here. So this is very serious. I know this committee has oversight of DOJ, even though the FBI is a member of the intelligence community. It's there's sort of bifurcated responsibilities here. But I think what you saw and heard from in the press by a bipartisan expression is that this is unacceptable. And we're going to do and use every tool available to us to gain access to this information. We're used to seeing classified information in confidence. Members of the intelligence community and members of Congress that give access to information don't leak, we hope. But I can tell you with all confidence that the members of the Intelligence Committee don't leak, and we see classified information on a daily basis. So I wanted to mention that because I do think this is going to be an ongoing controversy, but it is completely unacceptable to me, and I believe on a bipartisan basis, for the Biden administration to block Congress from performing its constitutional duty here. And there are issues much larger than an individual criminal investigation that I think need to be addressed. So thank you for giving me the chance to.
Senator, I'd just like to make a couple points, and one of them is the Trump investigation about the documents began last summer, and I don't recall any request by anyone to see those documents until yesterday's meeting of the Intelligence.
You might not be aware of the request. There was actually a letter written by Chairman Warner and Vice Chairman Rubio asking for access to the documents, and that was not forthcoming.
It was not forthcoming, you're saying? It wasn't? The second point is very important. I keep repeating over and over again the links we go to in Congress to protect the documents and the information. Intelligence Committee is a different situation for sure, but I mean, any classified document shown to me in my office is then removed from my office by the same person. So the note that I'd leave it on top of my desk or take it home is just not even possible. So I think we've really gone to a great extent. I want to make sure that we preserve that. I respect the Intelligence Committee and what you had to say about their integrity, but I want to make sure that we don't end up being guilty ourselves of creating an atmosphere where there's disclosure of something that's sensitive.
Well, we want to protect your rights as a member of the United States Senate to perform your constitutional responsibilities, and we want to do that for all 100 members of the Senate and all 435 members of the House. I would mention just one precedent. You recall during the Russiagate investigation, there was a special counsel appointed, yet concurrently with that, there was an unprecedented investigation by the Senate Intelligence Committee on a bipartisan basis that produced a multi-volume report into that entire matter. That happened concurrently, and there was no refusal to provide the information by Director Mueller, the special counsel, or by the administration to provide access to that classified information. So I believe there is precedent, and Congress has demonstrated it can act responsibly and handle this sensitive information with the care that it deserves.
Let me suggest that Senator Graham and I meet with the leaders on the Intelligence Committee and make sure that we're speaking with one voice on this. And in the meantime, the notion of shutting down the Senate's nominations activity over this, I hope it doesn't come to that. We have important work to do.
Well, Mr. Chairman, you know, senators don't have many levers. That's one of the few levers. We do control the purse strings. Nobody wants to take this to that level. I think this is something that should be discussed by the leadership and by rank and file members, and some sort of solution offered and achieved.
Senator Blackburn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the subject of nominations and cooperation, I did want to speak for just a moment this morning because there is one nominee that was not renominated, and that is Casey Arrowwood, who was nominated to be U.S. Attorney for the Eastern Division in Tennessee, and there is no doubt he is well qualified for this. He served our country as a captain in the Army. He was in the Obama Justice Department's National Security Division. He has had a sterling career as a federal prosecutor, and he received several awards during his time in Eric Holder's DOJ. And there is nothing about his record that would disqualify him from being a U.S. attorney, but the clock ran out on him, and President Biden has chosen not to renominate him. All of this did come as a surprise to me because it was the Biden White House that had recommended him for this seat. And I was even more surprised to learn that the reason you refused to move forward with his nomination, and the reason the White House ultimately chose not to renominate him, is because another member of the committee had concerns about one of the cases that he prosecuted. And I'm not going to get into the details of the case, but the prosecution in question was authorized by the Obama Justice Department, and there is absolutely zero evidence that Mr. Arrowwood acted in anything but an ethical and professional manner in exercising his duty as a prosecutor in that case. My colleagues' alleged concerns, I feel, are baseless. And as you know, Mr. Chairman, I have had serious reservations about many of the nominees who have come through this committee over the last couple of years. I have always followed the committee's longstanding process for registering my opposition to those. You and I have discussed this. I have never demanded a roll call vote on any U.S. attorney or U.S. Marshal nominee, and I have never demanded a floor vote on any of these nominees. When I've had an objection, I have simply asked to be recorded as a no without obstructing the committee's work. And it has become clear, however, that there is a new standard in this committee for U.S. Attorney nominees. You allowed another member of the committee to submit multiple rounds of questions for the record to Mr. Arrowood, and this stalled the nomination. And then you decided to let the nomination lapse because another member of the committee had concerns about him, rather than proceeding with a voice vote on his nomination and allowing my colleague to record their opposition as a no. There was a decision to nullify his nomination and to leave the people of Eastern Tennessee without a U.S. attorney. This is a well-qualified, good man who has served our nation well. If Mr. Arrowood, who was initially recommended by the Biden White House and who has a sterling record as a veteran and a federal prosecutor, was so objectionable that he required a roll call vote, then going forward, I will simply apply the same standard to all nominees that come before this committee. Anytime I'm considering a U.S. attorney or U.S. Marshal nominee, I will be sure to ask myself whether that nominee is more objectionable than Mr. Arrowood, and I will request a roll call vote on any nominee who does not satisfy that exacting standard. So let me close by reminding you that this is not the first time the committee has thrown process out the window for a Tennessee nominee, and it is not the first time or the only time that Senator Hagerty and I have been treated differently with disrespect or blindsided by the committee's nomination process. You are once again setting a new precedent for nominees who come through the committee, and if this is your precedent, then I will follow your lead. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Blackburn, and we've had several conversations about this situation, and it is true that there was opposition to his nomination from more than one member on the Democratic side. It is the White House's decision on renomination, and they have decided at this point not to renominate this individual. So I can't change that, and that is the reality that we face. Are there any other members seeking recognition?
Could I?
Certainly, Cindy.
Along those lines, you may not can change it, but you can try. What she's saying makes plenty of sense. Listen, I'm going to work with y'all guys to the extent I can on U.S. attorneys and district court judges. I'll sit down with Congressman Clyburn. We'll try to find some way forward. We're all pretty well capable of doing that. But if we're going to allow some people outside our states to have vetoes of the basic nominating process, then be careful what you wish for.
I think cooperation is the key to this closely divided Senate and closely divided committee. I'll do my best to maintain that. If there's nothing else to come before the Senate Judiciary Committee, we stand adjourned.